really have no idea how to intro this. I just have no idea how to intro this. It's a combination between Pistons and Lions. All right, I guess we say Detroit. Let's talk. Let's do a comparison between the two franchises. Of course, they're two different sports professionally. Nonetheless, we're going to talk about their rebuilding process. Their rebuilding process. Let's say, okay, you have two general managers, two head coaches. All right, okay. You have Troy Weaver with the Pistons, and you have Brad Holmes with the Lions. All right, now we're gonna deal with strengths and weaknesses. I guess we could do that. We also could deal with windows. What section or in their development, where are they? All right, and we're going to play the fair card. We're going to play with the cards that it was dealt, as well as what was. I guess you could tie that into what previously was established. So I bring this video up because I hear the talk about the comparison of the two. Now, before the season started, very specifically during the point of the draft, the NBA draft, that is, it was a hooray for the two general managers. Now it's basically one against the other, according to the fans, and that which is ridiculous. Very specifically, the way that they bash one and uplift the other, right? Okay, both general managers is in a rebuilding process, yet their rebuilding process is totally different. Let's say Brad Holmes has the upper hand than what Troy Weaver came into. Troy Weaver, is it fair to say that Troy Weaver came into, I want to say a dumpster fire. He came into actually nothing, right? He had nothing to go off of, nothing to build with, and he was able to, I guess you could say, do what he best he can with what he had to deal with, what he had to build with. So, his first draft, he gets Killian Bay Stewart from nothing, right? You could say he gave away Kennard and all that sort of thing. Absolutely, he inherited. Well, he drafted something off of nothing. Now, when you look at on the other side, we look at Brad Holmes, and we see that he inherited what? He had a legitimate offensive line. He had an All-Pro and Ragnow. He had a borderline Pro Bowler and Decker. And Jonah Jackson was coming. Right? He already had that there, along with DeAndre Swift to accompany that. No quarterback, or actually he did have a quarterback. The quarterback was requesting to leave, which was Stafford, which granted him 2 first-round draft picks. See, now in comparison to what Troy Weaver had to deal with, had to play with. Had to play with. He had absolutely nothing. He had nothing to play with. So if anybody says like, well, what's taking so long with the Pistons rebuild versus the Lions rebuild? Well, the Lions rebuild actually wasn't a rebuild. It was a continuation of the building. What I mean by that is what Bob Quinn did was establish the offensive line. If you're going to do a rebuild, you're going to have to rebuild off of something that's going to be solid for years to come. And he invested a lot into the offensive line, but he couldn't do anything. Bob Quinn didn't have anything until he inherited Frank Ragnow. He didn't have anything in Decker until he inherited Frank Ragnow. Ragnow had to go from guard to center, and he had to take his game from being non-existent to being a Pro Bowler / All Pro level. And that's what he did. He constantly excelled. Every year he excelled. You can't say the same thing about Decker. You can say he maybe improved, then regress, improve, regress, sort of deal. So until you get that one guy that constantly is ascending, you really don't have nothing to go with. Now let's flip it back over to the Pistons. When Troy Weaver took over, what did he actually inherit? What player is actually was going upward when he was here? He brought in Jeremy Grant. That was the only player that was actually ascending. Yet it's going up against what you're bringing in through the draft, young players. So you have a veteran guy with no veteran team per se that's going upwards that can actually, or we could say this, that can actually that's actually compatible to Jeremy Grant at the time. No. So with that said, the Pistons have nothing to build with. So okay, fast forward to the second draft of Troy Weaver. He gets Cade Cunningham. Cade Cunningham is still a no-show. 2 years, he's a no-show. What I mean by a no-show is that you still haven't had him for a full season where you can see what you can build off of. No matter how high of a draft pick that he is, they still don't know what they have in him, in in terms of his development going upward. For the basics, they really don't even know what they have. Just him being durable enough to play for a season. They don't know what they have. They don't know his strength or his weaknesses. They don't. So the Pistons and they rebuild don't have a leader to build off of yet. They have on paper the leader, which is what my gripe was for since they before they drafted the guy. I was against I was against them drafting him. Once they drafted him, I said, okay, I give him a shot. But then once I saw the first year, I was telling the fans, I'm like, he's not the guy. That was actually after Dave Beam made his comment about it, and I actually agreed with him, and I still agree with him to this day. He's not the guy. Let's say it this way, he's not the guy for Detroit. Detroit will have to really turn this culture for him to be the guy. The culture is hard work. You could say defense, get into the opponent's head. That's Detroit's MO. Pistons, that is. K doesn't fit that as what I've seen. So they don't really have anything established. So if to make this into a point, or turn that into a point, when I hear the fans say that, Pistons should be doing something by now, give me a guy they can build off of. And go ahead and say it's Troy Weaver's fault. It's not Troy Weaver's fault. Is it clear to say that Cade Cunningham is a decent talent? People that wanted him here, by the consensus pick, he was the number one overall pick in that draft, right? So is there a problem with that? No. Has he been on the floor? No. So until your allegedly best player is on the floor, you really don't know what you got. You don't know what you, not forgive me, you don't know what you have. And Troy Weaver getting his slight, some of his draft picks is not panning out. Nobody knows what they're, it's kind of, it's almost like the Pistons is a scrimmage team, right? And with purpose intended, until their main guy gets ready. And I will say this. I don't believe they have their main guy. I don't believe Cade Cunningham was their guy, or he is their guy. I think he's the guy next to the guy. I don't think he's the guy. I believe he was the best guy available, and he was the best fit for this team at the time. Overall, if you were to do a redraft, I would take, of course, which actually was my initial pick, was Mobley. I'd have picked him over anybody else. It, of course, that's hindsight, as well as how I was speaking about it through the course of the draft. I'm just not a Cade guy, you know. That don't mean he's a bad player. Don't mean he's a bad person. Don't mean any of that. I his type of game. I don't think it fits here. It's like Killian. I don't. Can he play? Yeah, I just don't think it fits here. It fits like a warm climate. It fits a starlight. I mean, forgive me, a Star City climate. It fits that type of team. I don't think it fits a in the gutter, you know, rags, slums type of team. I don't think those two guys fit that. So with that said, do I say that Brad Holmes has the upper hand over Troy Weaver? I would say based off what he was inherited, yeah. He had an offensive line. He had, let's say he had decent players all scattered all the way around. And the only thing that Brad Holmes actually did was actually finish a unit. That's the only thing he did. I St. Brown, that's all you have. Now people say that okay, he's doing all these brilliant moves. The only player you have other than Sewell is St. Brown that came from Holmes. You give me go ahead and say Houston, go ahead and say Hutchinson, go ahead and say all the only two players that you have is Sewell and St. Brown. Hutchinson is okay. He's okay. He's a hard worker. He's all right. He just doesn't move the needle for me. Can he be a complimentary player to Yeah, definitely can. Definitely. Don't get me wrong. He can get you double digit sacks. He's going to have to work for it. He's not a guy that is, let's say, is elite. At least in my view from what I see. But with that said, Troy Weaver is not that far from what Brad Holmes is doing. Actually, it's not even who is ahead, who's not ahead. Just Brad Holmes is he just inherited something that Troy Weaver didn't have. Troy Weaver didn't have anything to start off with. He had to make something to start off with. Brad Holmes inherited an offensive line. Is it clear to say that he had three offensive linemen that was, let's say, average to good? That's Decker, Ragnow, Jonah Jackson. Big V, you could say he was average. And that would be the fourth guy. Nonetheless, he didn't have to do anything. His first pick, you get the best guy that can complete what you are that's already established. Penei Sewell. Out of all the picks that he did, all the moves that he made, that's by far the best thing he done. And don't give me that he made a trade to get 2 first-round picks for Stafford. Without Stafford's consent, that trade doesn't happen. And all those other moves that he made, they cancel each other out. For every St. Brown pick, there's a Derek Barnes. And for every so-called Houston pick, there's somebody else that cancels out. You have Iffy, right? Or you have Rodriguez. Those they are contributors. Don't get me wrong. They are average players. They're bad to average players. St. Brown is probably the only guy that can go from average actually to good. And if you work at it, get healthy, work at it, he can go from good to actually great. But right now he's average to good. And I will put also Hudson as self-saying. With the exception of Sewell, every player that he brought in here is average to good. None of them is good to great. The only one that's good to great is Penei Sewell. So with that said, if I were to give a win-loss, I say it's 50-50 even, based upon what the cards that was dealt. The fans had the chance to see the offensive line play before Brad Holmes took over. They saw that offensive line coming together before, once they saw Ragnow take off, you had something to build off with. And then, of course, what's his name? Forgive me. Bob Quinn, when he brought in Jonah Jackson, that pretty much did it. He had Big V. He had Decker. He drafted Decker. He brought in Big V. He just didn't get a chance to make the Penei Sewell move. That's the only thing. So that's what gives actually for the fans they would say Brad Holmes got the knock over Weaver. I don't think so. I mean, all he had to do was just put the icing on the cake, which was draft that, complete the offensive line. That's the only thing he had to do. He had to do it. People say he had to do this, he had to do this. Once you get a unit that you could depend on or a player that you could depend on, you're good. You got something to build off of. The Pistons doesn't have that yet. So people say, well, how long is it going to take for their rebuild? It's going to take that longer until you get a guy that you could depend on or a unit or some form of, let's say, identity that you can depend on. With the Pistons, for the two stints of the championship with Isaiah and Ben Wallace, they had both of those guys to build off of. But notice that they both was at the bottom. When they both came to the team, the teams was at the very bottom. Very bottom. Brad Holmes came to a team that was at the bottom with a potential top 5 offensive line. That offensive line was doing good already. So anyway, with that said, I think I closed that out for let's make this part 1. Because I believe that this Wiseman trade for the Pistons is going to change a lot. Of course, it depends on what type of unit. Okay, let's say it this way. Bill Laimbeer was okay until Rick Mahorn got here. Bill Laimbeer, let's say it this way. He was average till Rick Mahorn got here. When Rick Mahorn got here, he had somebody who had his back and they developed something. That's one thing it's one thing to have Draymond Green in your ear and who has, let's say, a pedigree. I wasn't going to say pedigree, but he has he's accomplished. He's done things. He's won. To have that in your ear when you're a guy that's still timid, so to speak. You can play, you got all this hype on you, but you're timid. That's the difference between a player that comes in early that's ready and a player that comes in early that's not. If they're timid by all the attention and everything. He's the number 2 pick in the draft. He's starstruck, if I may say it that way. And on top of that, you go to a championship team. He's starstruck. It's not about talent. And injuries got something to play with, yeah. And of course, he didn't play that much in Memphis. All right, he got all that against him, but he's starstruck. All he just needs is a guy that has his back. One player. That's all he needs. Once Bill Laimbeer once Rick Mahorn came a Piston, it was over, right? Let's say it's the same thing for Ben Wallace. Ben Wallace was the lone wolf until Cliff Robinson got there. Once we got Cliff Robinson, Ben Wallace's game excelled. It excelled. He had the rebound role, before I think Cliff Robinson got there the year before. That's when he first became a Piston. But at the same time, he didn't really take off until Cliff Robinson and Michael Curry was in that lineup. I mean, they actually played to his strengths. Rick Carlisle played to his strengths. Even though he was undersized, but they played defense first, offense second. So it all depends what kind of player Wiseman is. Or, it really depends because you can actually It no, actually, it depends on what kind of system Casey wants to play. Do we want to play defense? Do we want to play spread? Do we want to play fast break? You know, what does Casey want to do? It's kind of hard to tell when you don't have. What I will say this. I say this. You can go Ivy, Burks, Bogey, Duran, and Wiseman, and just run. The only problem is you're running and you're going to give the ball up to two spot up shooters. That's the strength actually to that offense. I mean, to that type of unit. Why? Because Ivy at his best when he can run. He's at his best when he can run, and because he's a fast guy. He's at his best that way. He don't have much of a. I mean, of a. I want to say a shooter's touch. He can score. He's not Brondanovich. Brondanovich is a shooter. If you run and have them Bogdanovich and Burke be your position players, or not, forgive me, not position player, be your kick out players or whatnot, and you have two guys that can actually run, young that can run, they would develop something together. I don't want to call them twin towers, but they could develop something. And actually, they actually protect Bogdanovich on defense. The NBA is kind of different because it's a shooters. You can just shoot from anywhere. It's really not systematic. Systematic. It's not defensive. So it's really the possession ball is really funny. It's weird. It's weird. I don't know. But with that said, if I go with that lineup, we push the tempo. We play faster tempo. The only deficit with that is will be towards Bogdanovich. That's the only problem with that. I mean, I don't know, because he will actually be playing small forward, and until K gets back. Because if K gets back, I'm keeping that self same lineup, but I'm just switching out Cade for Bogey. But I will start that as my lineup: Ivy, Burks, Bogdanovich, uh, and my two lob threats. I can pick and roll. I can I can do a lot of stuff with that. There's not really much of a liability with them, other than of course you may say that they're not stretch fours or whatnot. All right, no, they actually not. They're rim protectors or they lob threats. That's what I will have. So that will be like having. I was going to say like Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan, but not necessarily that. Yeah, I guess you could say that because Blake Griffin, I don't know if he was much of a shooter early on. I don't know. I don't recall that. But when his injuries kicked in, his game evolved into being a shooter more so. But anyway, I'll conclude with that. That will be my starting lineup, and that will be actually my pace. Sort of how the Pistons was when Isaiah first got here. They was a run and gun, put it up type team until let's see, until I want to say Rick Mahorn, Joe Dumars. I want to say 80, 85. 84, 85 is when they start playing defense. Prior to that, when Isaiah first got when he first when he first arrived in Detroit, they was an offensive team. Him, Kelly, John Long, Earl Cureton, I believe, or is it Terry Tyler? I forgot how it goes. I forgot how far it goes back. I think it was Kent Benson. I think he was there, and it was I don't know. Was Vinny Johnson here? I'm not sure, but it was a high offensive team, and then once you get a couple defensive players, it changes. They could potentially run the ball until they get defensive players. And that's what I would do. That's my part one. Pistons fans, Lions fans. Oh, forgive me. I forgot to conclude with the Lions also. Now, with the Lions, with their rebuild, is almost like they. No, it's not almost like it. Let's make it a definite. They are in position to take the next step forward. That means they're no longer 8-8. They're looking to go from no longer being average to good. They're going from being actually good to great, right? No, forgive me. I said it wrong. They're no longer the team that's from bad to average. They're going from average to good. That's their trajectory. That's their window that they need to focus on, or should be focused on, or their expectation should be to going from average to good. Now, the offensive line is basically solidified. Well, of course, you can add a guard there, right? Okay, but if you got your 4 out of 5, you're pretty much good that you could depend on. They're not really much of a injury liability, you know, so that you could depend on that. You could depend on that from a team perspective, just an overall team. And when I would go in this draft, after I heard that trade suggestion or scenario, of the 18th pick for Josh Allen for, I guess you could say, a 1 year. Well, somebody also made a comment about it. They said if Jacksonville would take the check on his 1 year, then yeah, you do it. Yeah, I agree. I agree. If they take the last year of his contract and swallow it, yeah, I do it because I focus on giving the extension. But see, here's the upside to that. There's not much of a downside, even on the 1 year deal, because your who is your best defensive player? What we say is it's Hutch, right? Hutchinson, right? That's their best defensive player. Well, you better support him fast, smartly, efficiently. Let's say, I want to say competently, competitively. Can I say that competitively? Competitive, competitive. Somebody that no, that's not even the word I was looking for. I want to say, forgive me. Find someone who actually can. Wow. Find someone that can complement him. Josh Allen complements Hutchinson. You can even certain downs. You can move Hutch on the inside. You can move or down the line. I mean, you can move him. And so, what does that do? If I with the 18th pick, and I let's say I go for Josh Allen, right, as my end. Now I could put Houston on the outside, or I have a rotation, right? Not just that, my defensive line is I still have about number my 6 overall pick, and it depends on how it goes. Let's say if Anderson and Carter, either one is on the board around about the fifth to sixth pick. Some projected mock drafts have 3 to 4 quarterbacks going early, whether it be teams trading up or the first few teams actually selecting a quarterback. And let's say you have Levis, you have I can't. I'm drawing a blank. The gentleman, I think quarterback for the Gators. I think if I'm not mistaken, Shroud, and you have also what's his name, who's projected to be the number one quarterback. Uh, I want to say from not from Georgia. Is it from Alabama? You guys know what I'm speaking about. So you have four quarterbacks off the board that potentially can go in the first few slots, right? So that means it depends on what Chicago do. Chicago draft a quarterback, if potentially if they trade Fields or not. Either which way it go, we know the Cardinals are not going to go for it. They're not going to go for a quarterback. So we could potentially trade with a team to get our defensive guy. So let's say, for example, my 18 is gone, and I have the sixth pick, and I'm stuck. I can't trade back or nothing. If Carter or Anderson is in a position, let's say in that scenario like the Lions was when Josh Allen originally was on the board and T.J. Hawkinson was, that draft. And now they have the actual pieces, or they say the trading chips, to trade up to go get them. Trade up, go get your defensive guy. Why? If you get Anderson or Carter, either one to go next to. If you want to put Aleem, okay, in there, I don't know if it's as your nose, whatever. It depends on what system you're running. You know, you have Josh Allen on one end. You have Hutchinson on the other end. You can even have Houston on your outside, and you have either Carter or Anderson. If you get Anderson on your outside. So I guess you could say potentially you could run a 3-4. But look at that. Look at that. Now you have something that's equal to your offensive line. With this one draft or this one off season, they can solidify both sides of the line. Where you can build off that once again to go from average to good. Right now they're bad to average. People can say the Pistons just bad. The Pistons are just bad. They're bad because they have nothing to build with. Their main guy hasn't even played. And what I mean by that is, if people say, well, we have seen Cade play. Cade hasn't played anything. Until you know what you have for him from a night to night end basis, he hasn't played. He hasn't done anything. With that said, I'm officially gone. I salute.